Major Chris Whitney, take one. So, Mr. Whitney, we understand that...
Prefer being called by my rank.
Major. Major, it's good to have you on our show, for you to have me on your show.
Well, it's awfully nice to have been asked. As you know, I've been in constant touch with Senator Dodd, chairman of the Senate Banking Committee. Now, there's some confusion as to how to respond to the imminent threat to the economy due to the financial crisis. Naturally, I've been called in several times by the president himself to give my opinion directly to him so it's not diluted by the media. What we're dealing with here is a very complicated analysis structure. As you may know, this country is more probably serviced by 4,000 commercial banks in every little hamlet, large city around the United States of America. Now, the purpose of these commercial banks is to serve as a conduit from the central banks, which i.e. the Federal Reserve, to the American public for loans, for capital expenditures, and for operating expenses of businesses. Now, one would say, well, why does a business need to borrow funds? Good question. The reason for that is because any good all-American firm, so I like to refer to the American institutions, are always operating beyond their capacity to service their expenditures. The average commercial enterprise in this country is about 3 months behind in its receipt of sales, cash sales, needed to service its current expenditures. Where does it get the funds necessary to meet its current payroll? Now, as you well know, a payroll is meted out, usually weekly, to the well-deserving American worker, the hard-working American worker, blue-collar worker. As we in the elite area, that 2% of the American population who does not need to work. Why? Because of the fact that they have accumulated large sums of money and invested those sums in bell cow companies such as AIG, Texas Instrument, Lehman Brothers, and other well-known financial and commercial companies around the country. Well, we're getting off the track. Now, these commercial enterprises need to borrow, only temporarily. These funds are usually paid back within 2 or 3 weeks from the time they're borrowed. Where? From receipts, from subsequent sales. Who is it supposed to be available at all times to furnish these borrowed funds? Local banks, those 4,000 commercial banks. What is a bank? How does a bank earn its money? A bank is an institution which borrows money on the one hand and lends it on the other. Its purpose is to lend the borrowed funds out at a higher rate than it has to pay to borrow them. This is called the spread. And as long as we're careful in the banking business to borrow at maturities that are usually shorter than the maturities of our loans, we'll be able to roll over, as we say in the banking business, the debt at current rates, always comfortably below those that we're able to lend them out. So you see that these banks operate with very little equity. You can start a bank yourself by putting in funds from the local neighbors, if you're talking to them, and as soon as you have those funds, use those funds to go out and borrow funds. Take the combination of your borrowed funds and your equity, which is usually a ratio close to 95 to 5, and service people, depositors coming into the bank looking for loans, for businesses, for mortgages, etc. This system worked very well unless commercial banks forget to be conservative. And what happened about 7 or 8 years ago, the commercial banks began to think they were very shrewd speculators and began to advertise in newspapers and on the TV for people who were ill-qualified to buy homes to come right in, and they would give them a loan with no interest payments or delayed interest payments or with staggered rates, and in some cases with no requirement to pay back principal. Now, any person who saw those terms would rush into a bank. Some banks were also saying, we don't even check your credit. We're not going to bother you. We can give you a loan or approve your loan in about 5 minutes over the phone. This is what happened starting about 8 years ago, and so commercial banks began to put on their books millions and millions of dollars of loans to people who were not qualified to have the wherewithal to repay those loans when due. And when the point came along where other economic conditions caused their homes that they were mortgaging to decrease in price below the balance of the mortgage payable, we call those loans underwater. And eventually they were forced to be foreclosed on. And this is the situation we're in now, where banks all over the country are foreclosing on the loans. And what happens in a foreclosure is that the bank recovers the house and signs the house for sale by people who are incapable of making a sale in order to obtain funds to pay off the mortgage, and if any excess exists, to give to the mortgagor. The economy now is flooded with homes that have been foreclosed upon but cannot be sold. This is the situation we're in now. It's very simple to understand if you remember that the country's economy runs on credit. Credit is the engine which keeps this capitalistic system going. And if credit is not available, the economy comes to standstill. And that business I told you about earlier, who was quite comfortable borrowing to meet his payroll, no longer can borrow any funds because the bank can't lend any, because it in turn cannot borrow the funds it uses to lend. Stopping sharply in its tracks, that commercial business can't meet its payroll. The employees suddenly find themselves told that they are out of work. They have no money to go to the grocery store or to Home Depot, and we have a standstill and a depression. The basic cure is a reinstitution of confidence to the original bank that it can borrow funds at a lower rate that it can loan them, and that it has as customers viable businesses capable of paying back the loans. We're now in a standstill. The question is, what should we do? The answer to that question will be given tonight at my 9 o'clock show, if I can put it that way. And I hope that we all come prepared with notebooks and pencils.